Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our June Regional Housing Forum. I know it's been quite a year. We've kept the forum going online, and in fact, we've even had greater participation than in past years. But I hope we're coming to the end of that. Those with children, hopefully they're out of school or going to be out of school this week. And for the rest of us, many of us have had our COVID shots and are starting to move around a little bit. In fact, I'm going to ask a question in a few minutes as we try to plan forums for the future. You know, our theme this year, and a very focused theme, on the gap between white and Black ownership and rental rates and policies that affected ownership. Our nation's history is littered with a pattern of legal barriers, unfair lending practices, and discriminatory actions that have served to deny Black families equal access to wealth building. Owning a home and enjoying a property appreciation. The Case-Shiller National House Price Index is rising at an annual rate of 13%. The fastest it's been in 15 years. Prices are going up. And what that means is if we don't own property, we're not able to take advantage of this. Federal, state, and local policies and lending practices have contributed from Jim Crow to race-based zoning to redlining to unequal housing benefits under the GI Bill to benefit programs that steer Blacks toward rental housing rather than ownership opportunities. And if you remember the last 3 or 4 forums, we dealt with each one of those factors. While these practices have been addressed legally over time, we live today with the impact of decades of their use. In fact, the Black-white ownership gap of 30% remains as wide today as 1968. Let me say that again. That was 43 years ago when we passed the Fair Housing Act. And still the gap is up to 30%. The national wealth gap remains at a ratio of 10 to 1. Recently, we have discussed the rental support needed for families impacted by the COVID crisis. And I'm happy to say that some of that money is starting to get out. We're working from county to county, as that was the decision of DCA, and hopefully folks are getting help today. Today, we want to talk about closing the home ownership gap between white and Black families. Research has shown that home ownership positively impacts really everything. Our educational outcomes, our health, our environmental outcomes, our civic participation, but most importantly, and what we're going to focus on today is the economic opportunity, the ultimately creating wealth by owning our home. In fact, at the lowest income level, 92% of total homeowners' net worth is tied to residential property value. 92%. So we never like to have a forum where we're just getting into ain't it awful. So we're really going to focus today on the facts. Where are we in the region? Where are we in the country? Who's working on this? And then we're going to look at some models that have made some progress and that give us hope that if we could replicate that, we could produce more housing. So let's get on with the program. And I think we'll start by asking a few questions. We want to know who's in the room. And hopefully we'll be back in the room together soon. And we know the value of being together and conversations before and after the meeting, of having questions we could ask in the room, but we're still virtual. So I want to ask who's in the room. George, if you would get us going.
Absolutely. Thanks, Bill. So folks, if you would go on your mobile device, your phone, your iPad, your web browser, go to the address you see on the screen, www.menti.com. That's MENTI.com. And you're going to be asked for a code. And you see the code on the screen, 1947 4666. Enter that code and describe what role you play in the housing sector to help us understand who's watching today. Again, go to minty.com and use the code 1947-4666. It's really helpful if you take a second to do that. Bill, we have traditionally have a pretty split audience, a really broad cross-section of public sector, private sector, developers. We added a little split on the nonprofit question, though. We split it between nonprofit services and nonprofit developers, and we fully recognize some are both. So we just wanted to get a little bit more definition on that today. But as you can see, folks are dialing in to Menti, MENTI.com, and using the code 1947-4666. And again, we're seeing a pretty good split right now. We've got a pretty good attendance from the public sector and private sector, as well as a dozen developers and even more nonprofit service providers. We are always happy to have our concerned citizens, folks who are dialing in, who stay engaged on these issues and topics. We'll give this just another minute or so.
You know, George, I think one of the great things after having the housing forum since the mid-'80s, and we continue this conversation, is how diverse we are. I mean, if we were just talking to ourselves as nonprofit developers, we really wouldn't be making any progress. So working across public, private sector, and our different roles in the community, I think, is a key asset.
Absolutely. And 30, we're knocking on 35 years now of this being a safe space for folks to come from all sectors and talk and maybe have those conversations, especially in a sort of divided country see ourselves these days. It's a place to come and have some conversations. Sometimes they're uncomfortable conversations, but they're conversations that need to happen. So it's a good thing. Well, let's keep continuing to answer the question. We're going to move on, Bill, to the next question you hinted at. When would you feel safe returning to an in-person housing forum event? And, you know, we want you to take that definition safe. That means if you want to wear your mask, you're welcome to wear your mask. But let us know what you think. Same website, minty.com. This is the next question that should have popped up on your screen if you stayed on that browser or that mobile device. Would you feel comfortable in October, which is when, Bill, we're targeting the Atlanta mayoral candidate forum? And I see we chose a format here that didn't give us numbers, but that's okay. I think we can get those after the fact. But we're looking at October. We're not sure what we're going to do in December just yet. Of course, August, we will continue a virtual forum, and we'll hear more about the August forum coming up. Looks like we've got a small percentage of folks who are just not sure yet, right? We've got some who are thinking maybe early 22, but clearly a compelling number of folks who are comfortable back in person in October.
Well, that's encouraging, George. I don't know. You've worked a lot harder this year. We've all worked less, in that many of us are still in our pajamas this morning. So it's been easy to jump on the call. But I think the value of getting together and the encouragement we're seeing from this survey for the planning committee, we'll really take that in consideration. And we're already working with and talking to folks to put the October mayoral forum together. I think it was a very important forum 4 years ago because after that forum, we got a commitment by our now Mayor Bottoms for a big commitment to affordable housing.
Excellent. Thank you to those who participated in our 2 poll questions. And Bill, we'll turn it back over to you.
Okay, thanks, George. And I want to remind folks that during and after each presentation that you can ask questions. So whatever platform you're on, put those in the chat and we'll try to get to them as fast as possible. Some of you are on YouTube, some on Facebook, some on Twitter, but that chat room will work in any place. I also want to remind us, and this has been interesting how this has developed. that we will have another small group discussion on Zoom after this housing forum. I think this will be maybe the third or fourth one that we've done. You can see on the screen how to get involved in that. But that's going deeper on what we've discussed, kind of where we are and where we're going in the future. So I encourage people to participate in that. All right, now we come to that time in our forum where we're calling on our old friend Mike Harrison from ARC. Mike, welcome. And this always sets the stage for us. Where are we in the region? So I know you've got some numbers for us, so see what you got.
All right, well, thanks again, Bill. Again, my name is Mike Carnathan. I head up the Research and Analytics Group with the Atlanta Regional Commission, and we are an enthusiastic, long-serving partner to the Regional Housing Forum, and a long-term presenter at this Regional Housing Forum. And what I'm here to do today is exactly what Bill says. I'm going to set the stage for home ownership in Metro Atlanta. We're going to throw some numbers and maps at you. This is what I do. And we're really going to focus on that black-white home ownership gap. And given my long history of presenting to this group and my long history of going over in the time allotted to me, I'm just going to jump right into it and make Bill smile. So let's first start with the headlines. Now, look, we're all housing enthusiasts here. All of us have seen some version of these headlines and a lot more over the course of our careers. They're talking about, just kind of the overall decline in home ownership. We're going to look at that. The overall decline in Black home ownership. We're going to talk about that. And we're also going to talk, at least set the stage anyway, for what closing that gap might mean to our overall economy. Now, just let's start with some numbers. So home ownership has declined everywhere. What we're looking at here are metropolitan areas, the 25 largest, and we're looking at a period from 2000 to 2019, so about a 20-year change. And we see that in every MSA, we've seen just an overall decline in home ownership. Now, there's some caveats here because some of these boundaries of the MSA has changed pretty dramatically since 2000. So some of that home ownership rates may be impacted by just the boundary changes themselves. But the point remains is that we have seen home ownership decline in all of our metropolitan areas, including Metro Atlanta. Same map, same chart, but here we're looking at just the local jurisdictions to the 11 county Atlanta region. And you'll see every single county except for Fulton has seen a decline in overall home ownership as well. And again, there is another little caveat here. The city of Atlanta has undergone boundary changes since 2000 that may impact that overall number. But again, the point remains, we've seen overall declines in home ownership. Now, let's talk about that gap. Here's, again, we're looking at the 25 largest metropolitan areas. Atlanta is the light blue bar on the left. And you'll see that gap right now, according to the data that I'm looking at, is around 27%. And you see the numbers down here in this light blue box that shows the white home ownership rate in Metro Atlanta, somewhere around 74%, and the Black home ownership rate somewhere around 48%. So again, big, huge gap. And as Bill said at the beginning, these gaps have persisted for 50 years now. And you'll see that Atlanta, there's nothing special about Atlanta in this either. We're sort of in the middle of the pack when compared to all these other large metropolitan areas. So that's what the gap exists today, where it stands today. Now, over time, and here I'm comparing it back to 2010 to sort of circumvent those boundary change issues, we'll see that most places, including Atlanta, that gap has widened even since 2010. Now, there's some areas, say like in Orlando, a Portland, a San Diego, that gap is actually narrowed in those places. We need to recognize that. We need to celebrate that. But overall, we see that black-white home ownership gap has widened in the last 10 years or so. And so again, this is metropolitan areas, and here we can do the same with our local jurisdictions, our 11 counties in the city of Atlanta. You'll see, again, at least almost every jurisdiction has at least 20% home ownership gap, except for Fayette. And again, Fayette's gap is the smallest in the region by far, and we need to recognize that, and we need to celebrate that. Now let's look again at how that has changed in our local jurisdictions. And you'll see, again, most jurisdictions have seen that gap widen since 2010. You'll see Forsyth, big jump up there. Now that's, another caveat. We're talking about small numbers here in Forsyth. It doesn't mean that the gap isn't widening in Forsyth, but we are talking about very small numbers in terms of overall units owned by a black household. So that's probably helps explain why that jump has been so massive in Forsyth. But at the flip side, we do have to recognize areas like Cobb and Fayette where that gap has been narrowing. Okay, so finally, it's taken me 8 slides to show you a map. And here what we're looking at is the change in overall home ownership by neighborhood. And here on this map, the darkest blues represent the greatest negative change. And for those of you who've been coming to this housing forum, or those of you who've seen me and all my maps that I make, this is a somewhat familiar pattern. Whereas you see where those dark blues are, kind of this U-shaped, kind of starting in Marietta-ish area, going through Southwest, South Fulton, going through Clayton, up through Henry, up through South DeKalb, up here. It's that U-shape that we see a lot, most of the most challenging socioeconomic conditions in the region occur in that U-shape. And so the point here is that place really does matter. And here's just some stats showing that. Again, what we're looking at is the dark blue bars represent those dark blue neighborhoods that I showed you in the previous map. And you'll see that in those areas, those dark blue areas, is much more likely to see heavier concentrations of black populations, heavier concentrations of those in poverty, and heavier concentrations of student mobility rate. In other words, the students withdrawing from schools are higher in those neighborhoods that have seen the greatest declines in home ownership. And that's, again, something that Bill mentioned at the beginning. We don't think too often about, the role that home ownership has in creating stability for school situations. All right, we're just going to meander through some more maps here. This is change in the percent of black home ownership. And again, we're looking at that 20-year period here. I've excluded areas with less than 100 units occupied by black householders. So that's why you see Forsyth and a lot of northern Cherokee blank here. But you'll see again here, the dark blues represent the greatest increases in black home ownership. And you'll see, kind of that pattern going northward of the city. This map is looking at just the total number of change in units owned by black householders between 2000 and 2019. And this is the settlement pattern that we've seen in this region for really decades now, where, black householders, black populations are moving ever outward into the more of the exurban fringe of the region. And then finally, for the maps, here's just a comparison map. And there's a lot to unpack here. And I'm not going to be able to unpack it fully. And so, the story that I can tell from this is going to be incomplete. And so I need y'all's help with this. Y'all have access to this presentation. I want you to put some thought into this. Now, let me tell you why I made these 2 maps to begin with. It was my thinking that, if black home ownership rates should be the highest where there are the heaviest concentrations of black populations. And so that's what the map on the left is showing you is, okay, here's that spatial pattern of Atlanta. We all know what this looks like by now. The dark blues represent the heaviest concentrations of Black and African American populations. However, that is not the case for the heaviest concentrations of where Black home ownership is. That's going to be in areas outside of the areas highlighted in the map of the left. And again, there's a lot to unpack here, but suffice it to say that my initial thinking was wrong. Home ownership is not greater in neighborhoods already occupied by heavy concentrations of Black populations, and that's going to have some policy implications moving forward. And then finally, I'm going to finish up. I'm just going to kind of go through some whys, and this is not a comprehensive list. There are oodles and oodles and oodles of research out there that does a lot better job of explaining why this Black-white home ownership gap exists. But here are some things that sort of bubble up from a kind of meandering through that research. And obviously we have to start with, well, that there's just a history of racist housing policies that goes back generations and generations. Bill talked about that at the beginning. That made it just almost impossible for Black families to buy a home to begin with. And that's going to have impact on intergenerational transfer of wealth, which leads us to, the fact that, the typical white family now has 10 times as much wealth as a typical Black family. We see this in credit scores. Persons of color are considerably more likely to have poor credit scores when compared to white and Asian borrowers. We see that in a lack of financial buffer. So what this is showing is if you're hit with an involuntary job loss, households of color spend more of their savings just to get by than do white families. And if you don't have that financial buffer, you're way less likely to be able to save up money to buy a home. There's also some generational things going on here. If you look at the home ownership rate for people who were 25 to 44 in 1980, compare that to that same age cohort today, well, it's about a 10 percentage point decline in that. And so millennials are not getting into the home ownership game like their boomer parents were. And if you look at the racial and ethnic composition of millennials today, they're majority persons of color. So that's going to make it even harder to encourage that generational transfer of wealth moving forward if fewer and fewer people are buying homes. And then finally, there are just fewer two-income households, and this helps explain the overall drop in home ownership, but is particularly acute in communities of color. And so that was a very quick review of the data, and I will now turn it back over to Bill to see if we have any questions or comments.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Mike always tells me if I'd give him an hour and a half, he could do a much better job in the presentation. But, that's cumulative, Mike. After a year, you get that.
Yeah, it has been about an hour and a half. Okay, all right. You should have told me that to begin with.
All right. An interesting number, I think, as we look over the last, 12, 14 years, is the recession of 2008, 2009 took a big hit on everybody. And then, of course, your last point about whether we have a buffer or not, we knew that many, many folks did not have that buffer when COVID arrived. Any numbers that we can see yet, any patterns of how COVID affected this issue?
Yeah, and so, if you look at the housing market and what I was at the very beginning of the pandemic, I think most people expected the housing market to take a hit, just the overall housing market. Because if you look at the previous recessions, home prices always stabilized or even went down, especially in the Great Recession that began in 2007. What struck me is during the pandemic, home prices kept going up, and not just going up, but going up at record paces. Right. And so that great reset that we usually have in economic downturns just simply didn't happen. And so what that means is, like you said at the very beginning, Bill, that it's just getting harder and harder to get into home ownership because prices keep going up and up and up.
Well, and hard to produce housing as lumber prices go up and all the supplies. Mike Murphy asked a question, and I don't know if ARC keeps any data on this. Why do you think banks are not more aggressive in making Black families aware of down payment programs?
I don't have the answer to that. There's certainly nothing in my data that I have, and I'm sure the folks later on in this program can do a better job of answering that. I do think it goes back to just just sort of our racist history in the housing market. And I'm not saying that banks are continuing that racist history aggressively, but I mean that would be my first answer. But I don't have any good data to back that assertion up, and so hopefully some folks later on in the program can address that.
Well, excellent question. Can you see the screen?
Yeah.
Mike, so our good friend Dan Emmergut from GSU is asking Black family, can you read this? I won't read the whole thing, but it's really getting to the foreclosure.
Yeah. And he actually brought up a point that was brought up to me before the housing forum began that John O'Callahan pointed out, is that a lot of these homes that were lost in the Great Recession went to investors, and that's also exacerbating this black-white home ownership gap. So it was less a question more than just Dan being Dan and pointing out a kind of a deeper take on why we have this black-white home ownership gap.
And Natalie Kaiser, what do we know about age groups disaggregated by race? We know many older homeowners lost their homes during the recession, and that was part of what I'm sure they were wanting to pass down the family. Are we seeing any increase in the ability to purchase Black young adults?
Yeah, I mean, that one slide that I showed, does sort of break down home ownership rates by race. And we know that younger age cohorts just simply aren't buying homes at the same rate as their parents were. And really in the United States, the younger age cohorts are more diverse. They're majority persons of color. And what we're seeing is not only did the recession affect older Black families' ability to pass on their housing wealth to their children, we're also squelching future home buying opportunities because of the price of housing is just going up and up and up. That's pricing out millennials from buying homes. Okay. And so the problem is worsening. Okay.
Mike, thank you again. Always showing up, always having good data, and working somewhat within our timeline. So.
Somewhat.
I think this is a good segue because a number of the questions I just asked may get better answered by our two guests coming up. I want to invite Mark Alston from the National Association of Real Estate Brokers, and after Mark's presentation, Bilal Sharif from Empire Board of Realtors. Mark, I understand it's a little earlier out there on the West Coast, so we thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you. It is just after 6 a.m. It's early. Is it 6:59 now? Yeah, so it's early. I've been here, and what's even worse is, like I told you earlier, I'm mistaken the date, and I thought it was yesterday. So I was set up and prepared in my office, fully dressed, ready to go yesterday for this. So here we are today, and glad to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation and the opportunity. I really enjoyed Mike's presentation. It serves to reinforce some of the things that I want to talk about this morning, closing the home ownership gap. Give me the next slide, please. I am with the National Association of Real Estate Brokers. I am the Public Affairs Chair. We have been producing something called the State of Housing in Black America since 2013. I'm going to give you some data, a little bit of information from our state of housing report, our most current that's being drawn now, and invite you to go to our website, www.narab.com, and all of our state of housing reports since 2013 are there available to print, to view, and to research the history of our fight. NARAB's motto, started in 1947, is democracy in housing, and we have been actively working to close the black-white homeownership gap in this country since then. Next slide, please. As was said earlier, in America, in the United States today, first quarter 2021 with the U.S. Census, the home ownership rate for white Americans is 73.8%. For black Americans, 45.1%. The gap between black and white home ownership as of the first quarter is 28.7%. Next slide. Mortgage disparity. I think this is interesting. In 2019, there were 9,325,241 new mortgages done of all types. Blacks received, of those 9,325,000 plus mortgages, 516,405 in America, about 5.5% of the total mortgage production. Now, in the last data year, HMDA data year, 2020 just closed, we had a significant increase, as was intimated by the previous presenter. We had a great year last year in a pandemic. It was surprising. 14,460,821 mortgages, almost back to 2004 numbers, just slightly under, above 14 million in 2004, above 14 million in 2020. Blacks, the number went up from 516,405 to 711,526, but the percentage of loans to black families went down from 5.5% percent of black originations to 4.8% of mortgage. The total number of mortgages done went to black families. Blacks are 12.2% of the population, but only receive 4.8% of the new mortgages. Next slide. In your Atlanta metro area, again, what has already been indicated, white home ownership rate, 75.3%, black home ownership rate, 47.4%. Gap between black and white home ownership is about the same as the country, 27.9%. Next slide. The mortgage disparity, HMDA data, 2020. Total mortgages done in your Atlanta MSA, 304,367 white mortgages, 153,169 blacks, 55,226. Now, blacks are 34.3% of the population of the Atlanta MSA, but received about 18.1% of the new mortgages. The black denial rate is 18.64%. The white denial rate is 10.71%. And this is always disturbing to me. It took 106,283 black family applications to originate 55,226 new mortgages. That there were more applications, more than double the number of applications than the actual originations, both through denial and fallout. Next slide, please. Atlantic City, just in the city, total mortgages 27,007, white mortgages 15,047, blacks 4,224. Now, blacks are 51% of the population of the city of Atlanta, but only receive 15.6% of the new mortgages, less than a third of what their population percentage is. The black denial rate is higher, 21.83%, more than double that of white denial, 10.02. And let me say here that the previous presenter talked about this a little bit, but the more dense the black population, the worse the home ownership and mortgage productions are, the opposite of what you would expect. The higher the percentage of blacks, the lower the percentage of mortgages per the population. The higher percentage of blacks, the lower the home ownership rate per the population. 49.82% of Black applicants were approved, less than 50%. When less than 50% of the applicants that apply for a mortgage are approved, the rest don't get the mortgage. It affects the collective consciousness of that community. Everybody knows that if you try to buy a house, you may be turned down. Nobody likes that feeling. And those that are working and doing pretty well, they want to feel good. They want to look like they're doing well. So they go buy a depreciating asset like a car, as opposed to an appreciating asset like a house. It affects the collective consciousness when the approval rate is so low. 68.15% of white applicants were approved. It took 8,687 Black applications to achieve 4,224 new originations. Just think of all those failed applications, all those failed escrows, people that went are transactions, people that went in to buy a house or attempted to refinance so they could either pull cash out, start a business, send their kids to college, pay off debt, improve their financial situation, pay a lower mortgage payment, that were disappointed. Next slide. It's my contention, our contention, that this is intentional. Next slide. There has been targeted, and it's important to understand that it's targeted opposition to Black home ownership since the Emancipation Proclamation. Next slide. Public policy. Public policy is law. Public policy and tradition have served to block access and severely restrict Black home ownership opportunity. Next slide. What do I mean? He, again, referred to in the previous presenter, exclusionary zoning in Atlanta. You know, they had the 1917 Supreme Court decision that Buchanan versus Worley, that eliminated the enforcement of exclusionary zoning laws. In Atlanta in 1922, they passed one and zoned R1 white residential and R2 Black residential, creating the ghettos and the situations that we see in terms of neighborhoods today. Private covenants, people would buy land. The developers would sell, the landowners would sell land to developers with covenants that ran with the property, that they were not allowed to build and sell to Blacks, and Blacks weren't allowed to be on the property except in the form of being handymen or domestic servants. Of course, the well-documented U.S. government redlining. It started as a tragedy in America when white home ownership in the Depression went down to 50%. They started a brand new government program called the FHA, and then they authorized the Homeowners Loan Corporation to map the government and create these risk maps and put, if the neighborhood had Blacks in it, it was deemed hazardous and they were not available to get loans. It's this U.S. sanctioned redlining created a lot of the problems that we see today. And then we have predatory contracts because Blacks couldn't get loans. They bought loans on private contracts from the existing owners that had left the neighborhood. The previous white owners were charged more, given a land contract that was similar to a rental agreement. It didn't transfer title. If there were any problems, they were evicted just like tenants, resold and at higher than market prices. Eminent domain and urban renewal had destroyed Black neighborhoods. Eminent domain properties taken like Bruce's Beach here in LA and Manhattan Beach, took the property by eminent domain for the public good, turned it into a park from Black families. Urban renewal, sometimes called Negro removal. Places like Overtown in Miami and other places that they went in to destroy blight, supposedly, but totally displaced Black home ownership. And then racially disparate housing finance policies that we see today that I'll kind of talk about for a moment in a minute. Next slide. A good head start beats fast running. You know, when you have a good head, stay there. When you have a good head start, don't go back, go ahead. Next slide. Again, an old Southern state saying, a good head start beats fast running. When you've had 246 years of slavery, 103 years of Jim Crow, and then 53 years of fair housing laws. Next slide. We find that fair housing just ain't fair. You had 359 years of slavery and Jim Crow to produce the 1968 Fair Housing Laws. In 1968, the homeownership rate for Black Americans was 42%, for whites 63.8%. The gap was 21%. Today's gap of almost 30% is worse than it was. Black homeownership has basically stayed the same under fair housing, while white home ownership has grown. Fair housing just ain't fair, has not been fair. Maintenance of status quo is the overwhelming social construct. What fair housing has served to do is cement in the Head Start. What we need is advocacy for positive, affirmative, assertive programs and initiatives targeted, just like they were targeted to oppose Black home ownership. We have to have programs targeted to increase Black home ownership. Next slide. So NARAB has put together a call to action with 3 policy positions designed to immediately improve Black home ownership. They begin with the establishment of a national restorative justice housing fund. As we see the Biden-Harris administration put together these tranches of money, I had the opportunity to be involved, and some of you may have heard, the Evanston reparations program that provided a $25,000 down payment grant to Evanston, Illinois' Black citizens. We need to have a national restorative justice housing fund. Those who were impacted by and opposed with regard to the opportunity to buy houses need to have the opportunity to buy a house. Next slide. Next slide. We need to reform and standardize the school loan calculation for mortgage qualifying. It's gotten more difficult and more restrictive if you have federal school loans. 86.8% of Black college students have federal school loans. It's said that the federal school loan debt retards our young Black students, our population's opportunity to buy a house by 10 years as compared to their white peers. Next slide. This one is egregious and in place. Eliminate the loan level price adjustments that were established in the 2008 Economic Recovery Act. The poor pay more fee adjustment is what I call it. Next slide. If you design a housing finance system that prices loans based on FICO score and down payment in a country where we have the pay and income inequities that create lower FICO scores. The average FICO score for Blacks is 670. The average for whites is 734. If you look across the screen on the right-hand side, that at those dynamics with the 5% down payment, there is an increase of 0.5% for white borrowers and 2.25% for Black borrowers. That's almost always offset. That's a cost increase. That's almost always offset by a raise in the interest rate, which creates in essence, a Black tax. Blacks pay more for their financing from an organization that was created, the GSEs that were created to provide affordable housing, mortgage liquidity across America. Next slide. It's time to reform our housing system. It's time to redress and correct that which was done wrong with those who were wronged, and to restore the dream of home ownership to all Americans. Next slide. And I always like to say this: our lives begin to end the day we become silent about things that matter. The truth is, home ownership in America matters, and Black home ownership really matters. Thank you.
Excellent. Excellent presentation, Mark. Let me just ask, the National Restorative Justice Housing Fund, can we find that on the website?
Not yet. We're working on it, and we're actually working in with some of our industry partners, the Center for Responsible Lending, the National Fair Housing Alliance. There is right now the Biden-Harris administration wants to make it a tax credit. A tax credit is great, but a tax credit does not provide capacity at the point of sale. So we need something that's accessible to provide the down payment when the purchase is happening to make it happen. It will come to the website shortly.
All right. I want to encourage people to go there, because this idea of, well, it's awful, but we don't know what to do, that we don't know what policies to advocate for. We can't say that. I mean, this is, to your point, has been intentional. It's gone on for years. So we'll get into Q&A, but Mark, this was excellent. Now, Mark shared that NARAB is a national organization with affiliates across the country. And here in Atlanta, Metro Atlanta, our affiliate is Empire Board of Realtors, which we know well. So we've asked our friend Bilal Sharif, our current president of Empire Board, to join us. Bilal, could you put a local focus on this issue?
Yes. Can you all hear me?
We can.
All right, great morning, Bill. Great presentation, Mark, my fellow Realtors colleague. Yes, as well as Mike, that was a great presentation as well. I think we touched on quite a few of the issues, and even Mark has talked about some specific legislation and even solution. And I would like to, even concentrate on some of the more of the solution. Mark, I think you did a great job, as well as Mike as well, talking about the numbers. So I'm not going to dive deep in that. Y'all see Mark is very astute as it relates to numbers and the issues. That's why I wanted to be sure that we invited him on, as he is the PAC chair for NARAB. So thanks for that presentation. Well, Mike said something. He said, there's nothing special about Atlanta as it related to the decline in home ownership, specifically Black home ownership. And I think that is a major issue and travesty that Atlanta is considered the Black Mecca in heavily populated areas, for Black even wealth, but we're still suffering. So I think we need to be, one of the first cities or areas that is just as specific as some of the legislation that Mark mentioned, talking about home ownership reform, specifically things for Black home ownership or minorities. There's a saying that says every action has a equal or greater reaction. We talked about, the Jim Crow, the GI Bills, and those different things and lending practices, and that were just not fair for Blacks. Mike said, Mark said, fair housing just ain't fair. So I think we just have to be just as specific and intentional with some of the programs, which I think, ANDP, Invest Atlanta, a lot of these programs that are out there, we have to increase the educational, or should I say, increase the access and knowledge base to our communities, and then also expand those programs. And what's wrong with putting in there specifically for Blacks, Black home ownership, just as prior legislation mentioned, even, covenants to those developers about keeping Blacks out of certain areas. So I think if we were to be just as bold, in that reaction, I think some of those things would, start to take place. Talking about expanding the public-private partnerships. I was able to see some of the presentation of ANDP. As I scrolled down, I saw one of the homes that was mentioned, 1104 Hubbard. It was just ironic because I actually, my team as a broker, helped to place that tenant in there. That was a land bank deal. So some people say, well, hey, they're not owning the land, but this young lady already has the idea to pass that home to her heir, and that's part of that program, so that they can still be able to benefit, and catch a home that was roughly about $160,000, where you have homes that are selling for, more than $500,000 right now. So just expanding about those programs, increasing the educational funding to organizations like the Empire Board of Realtors and NARAB, so that we can increase the exposure. I think one of the gentlemen asked a question, I think it was Dan, about, I think that was Mike Murphy. Why did the banks why aren't they more aggressive about making the Black families aware of the DPA programs? I think they do what they can do, but I think some of that is, on us as the Black Real Estate Trade Association that was founded in 1939 to address these issues. We just have to, do more of actually increasing that access. Some of the things that the Empire Board is currently doing, right now is just that, increasing that access. We have an event that we're partnering with the city of South Fulton on Juneteenth, and we're putting on kind of two-part workshop. One is going to be concentrated on the youth, literally ages 5 all the way to 18. That's going to focus on financial literacy, entrepreneurship, as well as STEAM, based activities. Simultaneously, we're going to have the 6-hour home ownership workshop that is going to qualify all of the attendees to get the money from Invest Atlanta, from the Housing Authority, from Fulton County, the different DPA programs. So that's some of the things that we are doing, but, we need to make more of a footprint and impact, with those things. Yeah, I mean, that's just some of the things, like I said, I think just to get us back on track, I don't want to talk, too long, but, just expanding those partnerships, with, like ANDP, that I'm looking forward to hearing some of the other programs and updates from Washington on the NCST. They had a great program before that allowed, organizations and nonprofits that are, key components and dealing with affordable housing in the community to have access to, homes that were, kind of earmarked back by banks and things of that nature. We talk about reforming the student loan debt calculations. Mark addressed that. So all these different things will really help make it an impact and some of the solutions to help us increase home ownership or decrease the home ownership gap.
One of the things, Bilal, that you just said, which I think comes back to all of us who attend housing forums and participate in our own way, it's not them, it's us. I mean, if we got up this morning, and Mark gets up at 4 o'clock in the morning to be with us, but if we got up this morning and are a part of this housing forum, we are a part of the solution, are we not?
Absolutely.
Let me just ask, you may know this locally, and Mark, you may know this nationally, everybody in the world's refinanced their houses. But I see the turn down rate for African Americans, is higher. What's the experience been locally, Bilal, as far as folks trying to get a lower mortgage and use those assets for other needs?
Yeah, I mean, it's been similar. When he talked about the denial rates, I don't think that was just purchases. I think that was on some of the refinances as well. I may be incorrect within that, but we're seeing that as well. I was just talking to a gentleman just yesterday, and he's a very astute businessman and owns tax offices, a car rental business, as well as auto dealership, and he's in about 385, where homes are selling almost 800,000 right now, and they didn't allow him to refinance based off his amount of write-offs. And he said, well, as a business person, I'm writing things off and not to pay a lot of taxes, just as our previous president did the same. But why couldn't he get access? But once again, it's that educational component. So there are some new programs out there. I got him on the line with another very knowledgeable mortgage broker, and now he's very excited to now be able to potentially refinance his home because, as we mentioned, that's one of the main generators of wealth. But we are seeing disparities.
So getting to our friend Neil Shorthouse question, when we make major investments in schools, to rehab a school, to build a new school in an area, how's that affecting Black ownership? How's that affecting the prices of housing? And what happens in that kind of is oftentimes a justification issue?
Well, yes. A good friend, Neil Shorthouse, as well. Good to see your name pop up on the screen. I think it's twofold when we start talking about gentrification. And sometimes, even some of my thought process can not be always as popular. We need great schools and things in our areas to increase that knowledge base as well. And gentrification is not only a black or white thing, it's about affluence. So we want to bring in those other individuals that are passionate about funding for schools, creating more schools, because that's going to bring more people in the city that feel like they can invest back in the city of Atlanta proper. So those things are actually needed.
Can I comment on that?
Please.
Can you hear me?
Yeah.
schools in the neighborhood are fantastic. We believe in education. I've sent 4 children to post-secondary education to college with master's degrees. But I do need to say that our forefathers bought property, signed the deed with an X, paid it off and passed it down. Bringing schools into communities is fine, but what we really need to do is address the reasons for education is great. Our education has grown exponentially over the last 50 years. But the economic factors have gone down. We need to address the causes of the problems, not the symptoms. And that's lack of employment. Bring jobs in. Bring factories back. Quit outsourcing everything. Let's get back to taking care of those in our country and not bend to the public, to the corporate greed, and let's work on the public good. We got to turn our inner cities back into vibrant industrial economic models of prosperity, as opposed to these breeding grounds for crime and lack of opportunity. So schools are fantastic. I love schools, but they don't solve the problem. They don't solve the problem.
And you're so right, Mark. And through the years at the Housing Forum, we've focused on housing, but have talked about schools and education. We've talked about transportation choices. Looking at the earlier presentation about where we're making progress outside of Atlanta, we're pushing people out of the city as people can't afford it. So everything's connected to everything else.
You're right. And when he said that, it is typical that as Blacks become more, this is a family conversation, but as we become more successful, we want to leave that area that doesn't look like what we want to live in. So we abandon our neighborhoods, create a ripe environment for gentrification because we lose the value. We need to go back. You want to improve Black home ownership. You want to go back and recapture those neighborhoods that we left. Yeah. Other people see value in it, but we don't, because we grew up there when it was a desert, an investment desert, a grocery desert, a school desert, a work desert.
Well, I think we can look at places like West Side Future Fund and other kind of neighborhoods that are really trying to address this, because we're right in the middle of it, Mark.
Thank you.
I'm already about 10 minutes behind on my agenda. Golly, we could talk all day.
Yeah,
I hope you both will come back. I don't know if you want to get up this early, Mark, but Bilal, you're certainly always welcome at the Housing Forum, and I know a number of your members participate.
Well, we appreciate you having us. I look forward to actually sitting down and talking more specifically and addressing some of the solutions and expanding some of the programs, with, some of the partners here today, ANDP, Habitat for Humanity, NCST, others that you even mentioned that aren't even here today, Westside Future Fund and others, to really, help to close that gap. So I appreciate you having us this morning. Mark, thank you for joining us so early from the West Coast. And yes.
Thank you both. And I consider that, I gave you an invitation. I consider the invitation back, so we will sit down and
absolutely.
We'll keep focusing on this. Now, what we try to do at the Housing Forum is also look at where are we making progress, what are models that we might replicate, what are we learning from trying new ideas. So we've got 2 great folks coming up. Lisa Gordon from Atlanta Habitat for Humanity, which is a friend of ours, and we've had her here many times. We keep bringing you back, Lisa, because you keep innovating over at Habitat. So we keep trying to focus on what you're doing. And John O'Callahan, ANDP. Why does your name keep coming up, John, and ANDP keep coming up? Because of the innovation and the progress that you're making there. And it also, as I always try to do, how much behind the scenes ANDP helps us with giving us Georgia's time. No small thing. So I want to thank both of you for being here. I think, I don't know who's up first. George, how did we set this up?
Bill, we're going to go with Lisa first, and the question is, and she and John both have a slide, but the question is to tell us a little bit about the model that they've used to grow their production in the last few years.
Okay, I'll start. I think I have a slide to just show you. I joined Habitat in July of 2015, so I'm coming up on my 6-year anniversary. It's been a great experience, and one of the things that we wanted to show was we focused from single-family home development infill to a neighborhood revitalization strategy. And we've done, we had a new strategic plan. And so just 3 goals: increase our home ownership and our capacity, focus on targeted neighborhoods, and build Habitat's capacity, not just here, but also in South Fulton. And we have a new restore and operations center that's going to go live in the next 60 days there. And we've been collaborating with the city of South Fulton. So, you know, further into Metro Atlanta, where there's some of the job centers that was mentioned earlier. So in our 5 years, we've served about 700 families, including rehabs of houses and built. And then our repair program is $20,000 to existing residents, non-Habitat homeowners. And that is to keep displacement from happening in these communities. And then our brush with kindness is, again, the aesthetics in any of the communities increase when the homes look good and there's minor repairs. And so we're working in over 100 neighborhoods for revitalization efforts. And then we also started a program. We got a lot of feedback that our program was not attainable to people. And so we started a program called My Money, My Future, and it's financial literacy, a savings match, and it's before you get to Habitat or you get to ANDP. How do you get your financial house in order so that you can address some of the issues that were addressed earlier by some of the speakers in terms of the credit score, in terms of your savings, in terms of your debt load? And so we work with families on a 9-month basis on one-to-one counseling and coaching. And that is to increase the pipeline. And then this pipeline is used for any of the nonprofit developers, not just us, and so that we can have candidates that are ready to own homes. So that's it. That's a $24.2 million economic impact in the last 5 years. This is, wanted to share this video with everyone because this is our scale up. This is our Browns Mill Village community. It's located off of Browns Mill Road. It's about 15 minutes from downtown Atlanta, near I-75 and Cleveland Avenue. It's a $25 million project. We'll have 134 affordable homes, including a partnership with ANDP and Cityscape that are going to build 59 homes and have affordability up to 120%. This community will have amenities that can be accessed by the larger community, including green space, a community garden, recreational areas, infrastructure, and services that help complete this community. We have over 200 homes already in this community, which is why we picked it. And it's just a wonderful, wonderful example of how we can partner together. So I wanted to show that because it's really exciting. And it's what we're calling Habitat's new model community, where we can actually scale up.
You know, Lisa, I've kidded you before, you know, when you've been there for 6 years and after a couple of years, I said, you know, where's your I survive button? You know, you've got to have I thrive button. Looking at the creativity and innovation at Habitat. Let me just ask you, there are those that would say, well, we always had a model. We did it that way. It was successful. We should never change. You know, there's more risk in getting into development this way. You have to be more collaborative. How do you change a culture and a policy and a strategic plan in a big place like Habitat with such a strong brand?
I think the key is having a shared vision. And we started with, you know, what do we want to be, become, and be known for in the Atlanta market as it relates to Habitat. And so it wasn't about throwing out the baby with the bathwater. It's like, what's great about the programs that we have: engagement with the community, people building with us, philanthropy, a lot of donors and investors. Like, how do we expand and scale up? What concerned me the most is going to a neighborhood where we just built a Habitat home and looking all around that home and seeing a tremendous amount of blight. The second thing that concerned me was not seeing neighborhoods improve, although Habitat had been building in those neighborhoods for 10 or 20 years. And really what we did is take our board on a bus ride and take them through these neighborhoods. And we said, we've been investing in this community for 10 years and it hasn't changed. And unless we do something more proactive, it will not change. So I think that was how we got the consensus to be more robust in how we looked at our housing program. And then also, how do we scale up when 80,000 people in the metro area need our services?
Well, and it may get very back to Mark's point of, you know, this can't be incremental. I mean, we've really got to think big and do big. Let me pivot to John, and then we'll take questions for everybody. John, kind of the same question. At ANDP, you guys are producing a lot more housing. How are you doing it?
Yep, scale is so important. It's great to be here with Lisa. We've actually learned from Habitat and others. How do you do this? We're doing non-Habitat homes. Lisa's doing really hard work, but we need to be serving thousands. Today, our two organizations are the top suppliers, top builders of affordable single-family homes in the 5 core county area because the private sector isn't there. You know, it takes some subsidy. It takes something special. So ANDP's model is we've gone to our bank partners. We've gone to Go Atlanta at the Community Foundation. We've gone to the Atlanta Affordable Housing Fund. And we now have an internal fund where we don't have to get a construction loan. We save $10,000 per home just by creating an internal capital stack. We also went to what used to be America's greatest center of active small home builders. That group was wiped out during the recession. In the city of Atlanta, many of the best builders were also Black small business owners. So we've gone to those groups who don't have capital, like Cityscape, Redbrook Homes, there are others, and said, look, we have capital. Let's work together. Let's get your ingenuity. You know how to build at a good cost. We can market together. And we're going to partner with you and our capital to achieve our mission, which is to have quality homes that we acquire and rehab. Today, it's more new construction. Often we're partnering with other place-based not-for-profits. How do we do that at scale? So we started with a pilot during the foreclosure crisis, 6 homes. We learned a lot from those 6 homes. That was 2009. We rented those homes because we didn't understand how to sell them. So today, in our last year, we produced 122 single-family homes. The vast majority were for home ownership. And we've been able to triple our production just in the last 5 years. The final component, and we learned this from Habitat International, we are so blessed to have them in Atlanta, national group. We're blessed to have purpose-built communities here in Atlanta. We learned how to use hard-to-get Treasury Department money. There's a capital magnet program, comes out of Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac profits. There's the New Markets Tax Credit Program, which traditionally covers infrastructure for projects and maybe other development, but hadn't covered housing. Well, you know, Habitat for Humanity International figured out how to access some of that. We worked with other partners, including NCST, working with other national not-for-profits and forming a homeownership alliance to get more resources for single-family home ownership. In our system today, there is subsidy for apartments, low-income housing tax credits. There's vouchers. There's subsidy for high-income home ownership. You can write it off on your taxes. Lisa and ANDP can produce a single-family home at a lower cost than what most low-income housing tax credit apartments cost. But with a little bit of subsidy, with a little bit of charitable dollars, we can stretch that, create affordable housing, and wealth opportunities as well.
So, John, what's a little bit mean?
So our subsidy, you know, Lisa's model is serving very low-income people with more services. She's going to need more services because she's doing more per family than we are. We're trying to fill in the gaps. We can take literally our average subsidy of charitable dollars is $10,000 per home. Sometimes we don't even have to weave that in a transaction. It may be a risk reserve. So when we work with our private partners, you have construction materials go up. We want to make sure we don't go out of business. So sometimes that $10,000 is left in the home. Sometimes that's a risk reserve that allows us to have a bigger capital stack, get a lower interest rate, and then that's how we've been continuing to do more. Our bank partners have been great, but they want to make sure that we pay back that low cost 1 or 2%, 3% loan that they provide us that saves us $10,000 or more per home.
So we have probably 200 or 300 people listening, and I'm sure there's a number of them there that want to invest. Now, let me ask Lisa and John, what's the biggest barrier to producing more housing? Is it the investment dollars? Is it the policy issues? Is it our inability to execute? Where's the focus? And let's just assume there's a president of a bank in our housing forum, not known by name today, but what should we tell the investor?
I think the biggest issue that we have is I like the creativity that John and his team have come up with in terms of creating their own internal capital stack. A lot of times what we get from people is we'll give you a low interest loan. But in order to produce the housing, there has to be a subsidy as part of really our little performer, right? So if we get the land donated, that helps us with the subsidy. Right now, land costs are very expensive. Material costs are high. So we get sometimes donated materials. Labor costs come into play. So I think the issue really is that affordable housing requires some type of subsidy, and there is a gap. And so even in Browns Mill Village, in order to do that project, we went out and did a capital campaign, and we had that space, that whole community is 31 acres. It was vacant for 10 years, and it cost us, $3 to $4 million to invest in the capital infrastructure for that community come back out and for the land cost to be affordable. So there has got to be some kind of subsidy depending on what level you're trying to serve. And as John said, we serve people that are 30 to 50% AMI. So our homeowner is a single mom who makes $32,000 a year and has 3 or 4 kids. So you're talking about a 4-person household. So really the subsidy is key. And a lot of times all the solutions come up with is low interest financing. Well, we have a mortgage company. So if we needed low interest financing, we can put our collateral up and get that. So all of these programs, they kind of miss some of the key elements, in my opinion. So I appreciate the partnership we have with John, because when we develop with a partner, then there are things that we can do together that we can't do by ourselves.
So there happens to be a couple of bank presidents on the call today, and I think a couple of CEOs from major foundations. What do you tell them? I mean, you're in their office right now. Look at us and tell that investor, is it, we know how to do this. We've got a model that works. We are on a creative track to try new things, which is always hard to do. Why invest in ANDP, John?
So, it's just not ANDP that's scaling our work. I'll make our case. We talked about Habitat. The Atlanta Land Trust is doing great work. Pittsburgh effort with the Casey Foundation, Lawrenceville Housing Authorities, not-for-profit. There is FCS. There's scaled home ownership and there's scaled rental. So there are two pieces. There is a need for low-cost capital to reduce operating costs, reduce debt costs, that provides some of the subsidy that is needed. But ultimately, for all affordable housing, it costs more today to develop a home or apartment than the math just doesn't work. So Lisa's point, charitable dollars or governmental dollars, subsidy dollars through not-for-profits, which are right now the top developers of affordable home ownership in the city of Atlanta, is the key. And for us, we're also doing a capital campaign, Lisa. We looked at yours, and that land purchase is key. If we don't have debt and we hold land in Atlanta, Fulton County, we can put it in the land bank. We don't have any holding cost. We buy it today. We can develop it over time. We can partner with other not-for-profits. We can learn from each other's best practices. I learned from Habitat. We're doing a new markets tax credit transaction with y'all, but also now with Westside Future Fund. Atlanta has a more cooperative, not-for-profit ecosystem than any other community I've sort of seen. And great stuff is going on, but we need to invest in that infrastructure. That is going to be the majority of the production for affordable housing outside of the wonderful low-income housing tax credit program. We have that. We're going to use it. That exists outside of public housing dollars. We have that. We're going to use it. But if you want something additive, this is the system to invest in. And we've got two of several great players to invest. And invest in one, invest in all, centralize, just invest.
So our topic today is Black ownership. So how, and Lisa, I'll look to you, how do you take an equity lens? I mean, everybody needs affordable housing, but today we're focusing on equity lens. What do you do at Habitat?
Well, I think for our program, you can see we have our demographics up of who we serve. So 93% of our families are Black families, which means we're contributing at a higher rate. You saw those gaps, but we are actually closing the gap at a higher rate than the larger community. So it's probably, even if you took the numbers we saw earlier today and you broke them down by, the home ownership that is actually happening, you would see that we would have probably even a higher percentage than those local numbers that are with commercial banks. But I think the most important thing is we have to prepare people for homeownership. So capacity building is really important, and helping people understand, what does it mean to be a homeowner, and then giving them access and opportunity to programs. People come to Habitat's program and we will send them to FCS. We will send them to ANDP. We will send them to other programs if they're not eligible for our program. Same thing with creating a pipeline. I think it's important for us to make sure people understand how these systems work, and also, if you're getting a land bank, if it's down payment assistance, what comes along with those programs, because sometimes it can be very complicated for folks. So I think that's one thing, just education, outreach, and creating the pipeline. I think the second thing for equity has got to be intentional policies that address the historic practices of the past. And so we know in Atlanta, there have been practices that do not support Black home ownership. And today, even as we set up programs and we have funding set aside, that's government set aside, sometimes those programs are very challenging to access. And they put organizations, trying to decide, do I have the people to get through the program to access the funds? Or is there a streamlined way to get funds to us? Like John and I said, we're the top producers. How do we get more opportunities to really leverage and scale and work together? So I'm really excited that on our own, we have been collaborating, and on our own, we have figured out ways to do it. But I would love to see that investment come back from some of the entities that have a lot more funding available, and it's going unused. I think that's the final point I'll say. There is funding out there that's going unused. So how do we leverage that?
John?
Yeah, so similar to Lisa, 77% of the families we serve are African American. The majority are lower income. We did an impact study. We need to find out what we're doing. Does it work? So our families have a housing cost of $604. That's set. It's not going up. They're staying in their homes. Their kids aren't having to leave because the rent went up and moved to another school. Their average wealth creation is $88,000. Through our partnership model, we're investing in our 5-year plan to develop 2,000 units just in the home ownership piece, $50 million in small Black-owned businesses who are working in home ownership or small community development projects, both through our direct home building work, but as well through our lending. Down payment assistance is key. We actually joined the Federal Home Loan Bank. So we're a not-for-profit member. We're the only member in the whole country that uses down payment assistance and says you don't have to get your first mortgage from ANDP. We don't provide it. Go to a bank, go somewhere else, but we will layer down payment assistance. So I think it does take innovation to do this, and addressing past discrimination is critical. But I'm going to raise a point. We saw what's going on in the mortgage markets. We know that my dad got out of World War II and could buy a house, and that got him his small business and got me through Georgia Tech and some tough financial times. So all that is real and real today. But if there's not a single home to buy under $200,000, it doesn't matter whether you're discriminated against or not, whether you're black or white, whether your credit score is perfect or not, because the private sector is not producing at those price points. So with a little bit of investment, we, other not-for-profits, can take advantage of existing programs, pull some money from Washington, and grow it. Down, we're going to hear from Chris Sigwin. There needs to be more national resources targeted towards this production system because we are really good stewards. Affordable home ownership is affordable housing. It's very efficient, but it's also wealth creation. It's also investment in Black-owned small businesses. Lisa's doing the same thing, who she's partnering with on hers. It's amazing the return on the investment.
And you've helped me with my segue to my next guest, but let me just kind of final question here. I assume, Lisa, you're getting calls from habitats all over the country saying, what in the world are you doing over there in Atlanta? And John, I assume you're networked with your counterparts around the country and the state. Are you guys getting calls about, share your best practices? How did you get there? What do you do?
Absolutely. We actually, I'm part of the Habitat International's U.S. Council, which is the national group that influences policy across the system. So we have 1,200 affiliates. So I do that. And then locally, we have a Metro affiliates meeting. Actually, we have one Friday where there's about 11 affiliates and we collaborate and we share resources. And then I've also been on multiple national and state programs talking about the things we do, specifically about the fundraising, because we have been very fortunate to be in Atlanta and do a capital campaign. There's some affiliates that have never done a capital campaign, or they've done much smaller. And so just getting the strategic plan, giving advice, sharing best practices, and I think partnering. I think the whole network is looking at how do we partner with other groups that are doing things that we're not doing, but that we can leverage. I don't think we got to change Habitat to scale up, but we got to partner with John O'Callaghan, right? So there's other ways to make sure we have complete communities that have mixed income, right? I know what Habitat provides. We know what John provides. We know what Cityscape provides. That creates a really great community, especially when we have amenities and especially when we invest together. So we really kind of, for every dollar Habitat puts in, John put in $1, Cityscape put in $1. So now we have $3 to address a program or to address affordable housing. So I think, yes, we are a resource to others, but we also look to other people for innovation, like John, the Land Bank. There's so many others that are doing innovation out in our community and nationally.
And John, I know that's happening for you. The reason I ask that question is we have to learn from each other, don't we? And the more we network, the more we collaborate, the more we work within associations, because we kind of come back to we all have a role here. If we sometimes feel like I don't really have a role, all of us have a role here, and we can both promote these success stories and collaborate in a greater area with each other. George, I didn't get to many questions. I saw one Eric ask about the model of the land trust model. Where does that fit? I mean, is that a viable model? Is that getting housing?
I think it's a very important model. Place matters. The need for a land trust in Clayton County, but it might not have displacement tomorrow, is different than on the Atlanta Beltline. And so we have been blessed to partner with Land Trust. They've got amazing leadership. They are focused on neighborhoods near and in the Beltline. But that is, a model for permanent affordability. There are others to make sure down payment resources might be rotated to the next family. There's a slew of options. And an eye on the next generation is very important in this work. And the work that's being done here in Atlanta by the Land Trust is just fabulous. Lisa, I know y'all worked with them as well, I think.
Yeah, the land trust is excellent. I agree with John. They have great leadership, and land trusts are really important in terms of long-term affordability. I mean, we have Habitat homes that were built 20 years ago in Grant Park, Emmett Park, and those homes have sold. And if we had a land trust in those properties, they would have been able to go to another family that could benefit from that community being thriving. So I certainly think they are needed. It's another tool in our toolbox. But again, I think our problem is like 80,000 people need our services. And John and I both, we have great progress, but it's a drop in the, in the lake, how much we are impacting, and how much we need to be impacting it. So I think it's all of those tools, and we partner where it makes sense. And we leverage each other's knowledge. And so I think that's the most important part of it. But we have to start thinking much bigger, in my opinion, or else in 5 years, we're going to be having the same conversation.
Well, and it seems like we're still having that conversation after 35 years, doesn't it? So let me segue, because we've mentioned Chris several times. You guys stick around, because I think there'll be questions. Again, the point being, we can do them one at a time, but that's not how we'll change this dynamic. Ultimately, we have to change consciousness. We have to change policy. And Chris Siglin from the National Community Stabilization Trust, we're really looking to you, Chris, to what's going on in D.C. We have a new administration. We got a lot of money coming down. I know this is your first time at the Housing Forum, but you're not new to Atlanta and not new to the work. Maybe you can just introduce yourself quickly to give us some context and kind of tell us what's going on.
Well, good morning, everybody. I'm very fond of the housing ecosystem in Atlanta. You guys do great work. I'm Chris Siglin. I'm the Vice President for Policy and Partnerships at the National Community Stabilization Trust. And we're a national nonprofit that was created during the Great Recession to be a bridge between community-based developers and the flood of foreclosed homes held by banks and other financial institutions. So in our 10-year history, we have helped transfer 27,000 homes from the foreclosure pipeline to community-based nonprofits who rehab them for homeownership or responsible rental. So I focus on single-family, affordable housing policy. And the new administration has been very busy. And could you put up the first slide, please? This is the outline. I think you've heard about the American Jobs Plan, which is the Biden administration's infrastructure bill. And, infrastructure has traditionally been thought of as like highway interchanges and, that remarkable highway in Atlanta, more lanes than I've ever seen. But it also includes airports, transit. They're beginning to think, and to the credit of the Biden administration, President Biden ran on transformative investments in the economy, and he, as president, has put forward a plan that's broader than anything I've ever seen, that takes the notion of infrastructure and expands it beyond just roads, bridges, to include airports, transit, broadband, modernizing the electric grid. We saw what happened in Texas this winter when their electric system froze. We've seen in Flint, Michigan, what happens with aging water and sewer lines poisoning children with lead. We're having increasing weather disasters and a need for climate resilience for homes, for schools, for hospitals, and federal buildings. So, and included in the American Jobs Plan, interestingly enough, is $318 billion, and that figure is over 8 years. So it would create a pipeline of subsidies for developers like Lisa and John to use. And so there's a variety of different housing tools. Because, I think one of the things that this event has, I thought, really effectively communicated is the Black-white homeownership gap was created by intentional, deliberate, systematic policy over a period of years. And to fix the disparity between the Black and the white homeownership rates is going to take an intentional, systematic, a set of policies that are as intentional and systematically as the policies that created the gap were. And so the funding for housing includes a variety of things for both rental and single family homeownership. There's an expansion of the low income housing tax credit program, which has been a very successful engine for building apartments, and that is leveraged with additional subsidy programs so that those apartments can be available to people at lower incomes. There's funding for rural areas, for tribal areas, for small towns. One of the things that I think is most interesting for Atlanta is the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, because that goes to this problem of the lack of supply of affordable move-in ready homes. And all of you who are in the real estate market know that one of the reasons why homes aren't renovated in distressed neighborhoods is it costs more to substantially renovate the house than the home can be sold for. So the market will never address that issue. If it costs $150,000 to fix the heat, fix the roof, fix the foundation, and the house can only be sold for $100,000, no investors are going to go in there. You need subsidy. So the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act is built on the model of the low income housing tax credit. And it is targeted to census tracts with low incomes, low home values, and higher poverty rates. And those of us who worked on this were very intentional of not wanting to throw gas on the fire of gentrification. So the incomes in the neighborhood have to be 80% of area median income. So if a neighborhood is the place where the young lawyers are starting to move in and rehab homes, that census tract probably will not qualify for the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act, because about 24% of the country is in census tracts that are eligible for this investment. It's only for home ownership. The homes can only be occupied by owner occupants. The resources are allocated by state financing agencies. And so this is the map of Atlanta, and this is where in Atlanta is eligible for the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act. And it is, so investors who put up money that is used for the either infill construction or substantial renovation will then be eligible for credits on their taxes equal to up to 35% of total development costs, or whatever the gap, the lesser of the gap between the sales price and the total development costs, and up to 35%. So that gives families then a tremendous, this program has actually got kind of a triple bottom line, because you have investment in communities that then help the other homeowners because there start being attractive homes for sale. Plus, the families that move into the homes have basically gotten an up to 35% discount on their home. So they should be in a good equity position when they buy it. And the State Housing Finance Agency will allocate these credits to Neighborhood Homes Investment Act managers. So nonprofits like ANDP or Habitat for Humanity can apply to the state to get allocations of these credits. So this can be a really powerful tool for addressing the need to expand the stock of affordable starter homes. So we're hoping that this is included in the infrastructure bill. President Biden, there's bills pending in Congress. There's a bipartisan bill in the Senate. S98, there's a bipartisan bill in the House, HR 2143, and we're hoping that currently the Republicans and the Democrats in Congress are negotiating over the what's going to go into the infrastructure bill. It could be, they could do a bipartisan package that's a smaller bill, and then the Democrats would pick up some of the pieces of the infrastructure bill that were controversial with the Republicans and just pass them on their own. Nobody really knows, but it's a chance to sort of, for our country to step back and look at the need to invest in things that will make our economy more productive, like transit, like having homes that people can live in. And I think that it's an important point that John was making, that affordable home ownership, you know, the subsidies that will be available through the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act are not large, but it's absolutely consequential and transformative for the families that will get the homes. So if you have a $30,000 subsidy on a home, that's all you need to set the family on the path to building wealth. So it's really a very the Neighborhood Homes Investment Act should be thought of as a broader package. And there's other things in the bill that I wanted to highlight that pertain to some of the other things that I've heard discussed this morning.
Let me ask this question,
Sure.
Chris. When you say it's been, and we all know this, it's been intentional, it's been systemic and systematic, the way we built our laws in the past.
Yep.
As we look at legislation going forward, is there an equity lens in that? And is it as intentional and systematic in trying to address the problems we're addressing today?
Yeah, that's what's so interesting for someone who does my job right now, is watching how people really are. So the chairman of the House Financial Services Committee is Representative Maxine Waters, who represents South Central LA. She has in her draft of the housing title of the infrastructure bill, she has a $10 billion proposal through the state housing finance agencies that targets down payment assistance grants up to $25,000 to families making up to 180% of area median income in high cost areas that are for socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. So she's, and the Center for Responsible Lending and NAREB and others have worked on this bill. And it's a very intentional tool to give down payment assistance to families that have been discriminated against historically. So that's pretty groundbreaking and different. And it is just as families were systematically excluded from neighborhoods on the basis of the FHA's redlining maps in the 30s and 40s. This is very trying to give the states a tool to target down payment assistance so we can narrow that homeownership gap. And all the, I mean, it's not any one thing. You know, all these pieces, you need subsidies for nonprofit developers and lenders. You need a good housing counseling pipeline. You need fair enforcement of the fair lending laws. You also need, one of the things that's interesting that's in the Biden infrastructure bill is grants to localities to get rid of exclusionary zoning. So that localities that have sat down and looked at how their practices restrict the supply of affordable homeownership and affordable rental, there's both a requirement that they affirmatively further fair housing. Could they reverse the Trump administration policy on that, and then give them grants to have a proactive strategy to fix it? So there's no silver bullet on this. It's not one thing. It's all these things need to work together.
Well, if we've learned one thing, there is no silver bullet. It takes the whole community. I don't know if you can see the screen, Chris, Dan Emmergott, professor at Georgia State. My professor never asks short questions, but when we get to the essence of what he's asking, we really lag when we see gentrification happen, where people are buying houses and then flipping them, which really doesn't get to the issue of trying to establish a neighborhood. Are there protections in the legislation coming down around anti-gentrification?
There are, and Dan, I would be happy to get your comments on the bill. Let me send you, I will send me your email and I will send you, I'd love you to look at whether we've got it right, because there are a couple of different provisions that are all supposed to work together to prevent, we don't want to pour gas on the fire of gentrification. So the overall, no home can be sold for more than 4 times the median family income. So that's supposed to be an absolute cap. So, someone who's doing a fancy renovation can't get these tax credits on the home. The second thing is there's a requirement that the owner occupant stay in the home for 5 years after they've bought it. And if they sell it within 5 years, they have to give back half the gain on a sliding scale. So that's to discourage flipping. You can't buy one of these homes and then rent it out. So we don't want these credits going to these, predatory companies that are buying up single family houses and renting them out. So with the focus on owner occupancy, and then there's limits on the income for the buyers, and the price of the credit and the size of the credit amount is limited to 80%, 35% of 80% of U.S. median income. So you can't get a really big subsidy like to do a house in Brooklyn.
So let me ask Chris. You've used the term, I think, twice or three times. We don't want to throw gas on the fire of gentrification. Well, I don't know. Maybe we have to throw gas on it. How do we talk about something that's so central, to the issue, without throwing gas on it?
Well, yeah, it's interesting because you're right. It's actually really complicated and nuanced, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because we want families want their homes to appreciate in value so that they build equity. The whole purpose of having a homeownership program to help African American families is for that wealth to grow, because that can finance small businesses. It finances kids going to school. You do want some home appreciation, and so laws are blunt instruments. We're trying to figure out that there is extreme gentrification in a city like Washington, D.C., where there's 200,000 more people in Washington, and historically African American neighborhoods are the racial balance is changing really dramatically. So there's a few places, but there's a researcher named Alan Malik who makes the point that he says gentrification is kind of a bugaboo, that there's a few places where it's like a problem, and most places families would benefit from. So it's kind of like, it's like Goldilocks and the Three Bears, isn't it? It's like, you want some price appreciation, but not too much. So that's why I think you need a variety of homeownership policies, because different things make sense in different markets. And for, like Toledo, Ohio could use all the gentrification, to your point, Toledo, Ohio could use all the gentrification it can get.
Yeah. So language is important. How we frame things is important. But at the end of the day, it's important that we have the courage, right, to carry the policy out. One more how things work question, Chris.
Right.
So the policy's coming down from the administration. It's probably going to land at the state, maybe at Department of Community Affairs, DCA. Then it may land locally at Invest Atlanta or other outlets. How much, if there's intention out of Washington for things to be done to address a particular issue, how much changes as it runs through the state and then the investment instruments at the local level?
That's a really great question too. And we generally run housing policies through state and local governments because housing markets are so different that you kind of have to let local officials work it out. That also means the downside of that is where you have bad local officials, you don't get great housing policies, but that just seems to be the federalism we have settled on by and large. So it will go through the filter of whatever the state of Georgia does, and then some percentage of the resources are going to go straight to the city of Atlanta, and people are going to have to work it out.
So point well taken, and something I think we have to pay attention to. No silver bullet. Just because the policy comes down to the state and local level, we have to work at every level.
That's
Chris,
right.
I hope you'll come back to the Housing Forum. You've been a great resource today. We try to honor our start and stop time. So, George, unless there's a question for Chris right now, I'm going to start wrapping things up. And I don't see anything, Chris. So I wish we had longer to talk, but thank you so much.
Thank you.
All right. Again, honoring our time. I think the last part of that conversation is what we're going to pick up at our next Housing Forum, looking at the tools that we have to talk about. And this, this is hard. This is hard. When we talk about zoning or how investments are made or where they go or who's getting kicked out of the system, these are the things that we've got to talk about. I want to thank the planning committee. Doing this every other month has been a lot more work on all of us. So I appreciate everybody showing up, but I particularly thank the planning committee, George Bergen from ANDP, Bruce Gunner, James Alexander, Marissa Ghani from ARC, and you can see our board. So we're always listening to the community about what we should do next. And also just to thank all of you for attending. I mean, we've actually had a greater participation this year in looking at our survey. I think we'll come back together very soon, and the importance of that. I think I'd end up by just the notes I took when I asked Lisa that question, what does it take? And her answer was, and I think this is an answer for all of us, it takes a vision. And without the vision, we'll perish. Without the vision, we're not going to change these dynamics. So we're trying to create that vision every day, that we've got to have good partners and a philosophy of collaboration. And I think ANDP and Habitat is a great example of that kind of collaboration. But we've mentioned many other partners, and we've had those partners today. So it takes everybody doing what they can. It also takes courage of our policymakers, because it's easy to kind of hide behind it's going to make people feel uncomfortable because change has to happen. So it's up to us to give them the support to make the right decisions and to make the right policy. We have good people in all areas of the community, in the investment community, the foundation community, the nonprofits, the developers in town. But often we're hiding behind the law of what's the law or what have we done in the past. And that really does not get us to where we want to go in the future. So sharing that vision with each other, supporting each other in our efforts, being honest in our feedback is what we strive for at the Housing Forum. Our next forum will be in August, and then look in October for a mayoral forum. Please continue to go to our website for the Regional Housing Forum. These things are recorded. A lot of the contact information, referrals are there for you. So you can download today's presentation at www.atlantaregionalhousingforum.org. Thank you all for being here. Have a good week, and we'll see you soon.